Okay, I'm ready.
Alex and Brendan,
Brendan.
with Ryan at a children's birthday party.
Okay,
It'll just be
understood.
us, I think.
Well, can we
Um,
find
Other than
something to
that,
talk about?
fair enough. I think that's a brilliant idea. Um,
Right.
the stuff that I got set up is like not the be all and end all of everything, but it's there. So it's up to you. We can talk about anything you want to.
I was just joking. You and I can always find something to talk about. I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So I looked quickly at the invite for today. By I've been busy since I got up, so I didn't. I don't even remember. But I think you're talking about what we're heading into for the next chunk of calls or sessions.
Oh, yeah.
Was pretty heady stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that to me is the exciting part. It's like right now I'm like heading to the end of this transition thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looking at perspectives and a few more things. And then going into that next phase will be like, that's awesome stuff, because that's the magic behind everything. It's the consciousness and everything, which is, I love that. Then at the very end, I think I'll just do like a wrap up of ideas and possibilities and things that we should be possibly working on into the future and that sort of thing. So that's my plan. So, and then after that, it's up to us where we go from there. It could be a case of doing the next book, or the next book and the next book. It could be anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's just up to us where we want to take it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, I
I
get it.
did, while I was on this journey, like overseas, I did write Gifts, which was a book on basically spirituality and giving and receiving and all that sort of thing. And then the next one was, I think you've read, which is The Feminine Revolution. And
Mm-hmm.
there's interesting stuff there because we have different ideas of, there's certain things I brought up, and I think you were like questioning a few of them, like the concept of love. Like, I don't quite agree with that, or I'm not sure that I'm on the same page as you with that.
Mm.
And so maybe there's food for expanding that conversation, because when you make a comment, I'm like, oh, okay, so what did I get wrong here? So
That. Yeah. Well, it's yeah, interesting. It's just another perspective, I guess, or maybe me working to get in alignment and questioning my own conversations before I can align with yours. So, yeah, it's an iterative process. Maybe that was
yeah.
just my first reaction to it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's all good. I mean, there's nothing
Yeah,
negative about it.
yeah,
So
I
it's
get it. I, as I probably said many times, the phrase "knowing is the booby prize."
yeah,
Um, it's the process of learning and continuing to evolve rather than saying stake in the ground. This is what it is. Um, so I still play with that concept a lot. That it's the process, it's the dynamic aspect of knowledge that's more important to me than be able to regurgitate something as fact. I think as I say that. Um, that probably was an issue with me from my early days, where just memorization and recalling data was just not my forte. And even though I was very bright, it's just hard for me to spit back stuff. I like the process of creation, but I didn't know it at the time, and I couldn't express that to anybody. And of course, in the process, I became domesticated and questioning myself, and then rebelling, and all this stuff. When it just, had we just allowed children to exhibit their innate intelligence and leaning rather than force them into a particular mold at such a young age, maybe the world would be different. Yeah.
yeah. I think there's so much to that, and that's one of the aspects of that. although it was prevalent throughout education, I never really brought up in my books. It's
Yeah,
like rote memorization and learning for a test and then forgetting everything you learned. It's like, what was the point of
exactly.
that? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And now and then some strange little factoid will pop into my head, but it's like, 1/1000th of what I was forced to learn. So I didn't consider it a very valuable process for me.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's a step away from actually living and experiencing life. And, you can try and pump in as much as you like. If you're not experiencing it and living it sort of in the moment and relating it to your life, it just
Right.
becomes bam, it's gone,
Yeah. Or there's no, and part of it is, I think as a youngster, I was an experiential learner. I picked up stuff. My languaging was really soon. Like at 1 year old, I was talking sentences. I don't remember that,
Wow.
but years later, my mother said, "Yeah." So whatever my learning styles were as a kid, um, what showed up in me was some kind of intellect that had my dad, when I guess I was 11, um, take me out of public school, which was basically a waste of my time because I would do all the work in 3 minutes and then spend the next hour uh, occupying myself. Not quite ADHD, but definitely, okay, I done that. So now what? I got to occupy. But my when I went to private school in sixth grade, starting, so 11, yeah, and it was because it was a school for smart kids, day school, and that channeling into memorization happened in sixth grade immediately. And I remember things like Western civilization. And it was the first time I'd ever failed anything in my life. And I think the first test I took, I got a 47. Like, I'm as bright as any kid in this class or this school, but I failed. I was so embarrassed because my life had been nothing but, easily acing everything. It was
Yeah.
effortless. But this is leading towards something. And what I got was that began that tug between my innate abilities and this system and my dad's desire to channel my abilities towards something other than what I had chosen. And we know that the system does that anyway. And as I think back, I'm just going, I rebelled a lot to the system, but managed to stay through it for 7 years. I graduated from that school. And that slow boiling the frog happened over all those 7 years where, by the time I went to college, I was so well prepared for college and like, why am I doing this? This is 1969. This is, the world is blossoming and I've got to follow this pattern. So I got that, once I got to college, I played about a year and a half into my middle of my sophomore year, the game, and then said, no, there are many more important things than studying this crap. And, I dropped out at the end of my sophomore year to play music for the most part and to participate in life differently than having my nose in a book on stuff that, and of course, your first 2 years are required, the gut courses, the things you have to take. And I studied all that in high school. So I'm just kind of reviewing my learning process. And it took me many decades to really break out and just say, I am who I am and I'm going to do what I want to do. And it's not like being selfish. It's that I'm going to do what works for me and, what I want to use my time on this planet for. So that it maybe was a little bit late. I think I've been a slow burn on that for most of my life since probably puberty from 12, 13. So, no sour grapes. It's just that was a journey that I had. And I got that a lot of it was influenced by other people telling me this is how you need to perform in society with the tools that you have. No, it's not. Actually, I think, about 18, which is how old I was when I went to college, there was also the draft. And that definitely brought my thinking into an existential and global thought about, really? I'm expected to just go and kill people. I don't think so. That's definitely not what I'm up to. So I think that convergence of the dynamics definitely had me choose differently from my 19, 20, the next couple of years. And as we all are, right? We kind of throw off the layers that have been imposed on us to find what we truly are. Because some of those layers, as you know, came on when we were absolute infants. And sometimes in utero, we're already getting programmed by the food our parents ate or my mother ate, or, her health or whatever. So, yeah, life is not only about revealing stuff, but it's also about uncovering the stuff that's so that we can reveal it.
Yeah, that's the onion ring theory. It's really once you go on this journey, you really are peeling off the layers that are holding you back, from discovering who and what you are and whatever. So, yeah, I understand that. That's awesome.
Yeah, in the life spring trainings, particularly, but probably it's in others. There was a process called junkyard, and I won't reveal all of it, but the ultimate aim is, I won't reveal much of it, but the ultimate aim was our life is a junkyard, and we've just thrown all kinds of stuff on top of our essence. And so part of the job, and it's a good metaphor for analysis or therapy or something, like you got to clear off some of that junk to get to the gem that's, at the bottom of the heap of all the crap. So, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, there was another one that comes up regularly. I mean, the whole thing of, I talk about the housekeeping of life, first of all, on that point. And the housekeeping of life for me is, living feng shui, getting rid of, like organizing your house, making sure you've got a clean environment, a clean mind, an organized computer, just simplifying and putting everything back in its place. And, so that you flow through your day, and you just, as you need a coffee cup, you've washed it and it's dry and it's put away in the right place. You just take it out and, put your tea bags in and whatever, and everything's in its place and everything flows. And your life is so efficient and effective, and you don't waste any energy because it just flows. As opposed to being in a chaotic environment where you're stepping over dirty clothes and tripping and falling and breaking your wrist, and then you've got to find bandages, but the bandages aren't where they are, and it's like chaos all around you, and you get nothing done. So that's for me such an important one. Yeah. And then the other one was as we're going through this journey, we're sort of like opening cupboards and discovering, oh my gosh, that's something I hadn't really seen it from that perspective. And it's that thing of, you don't know what you don't know, and you will suggest something, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't look at it from that perspective, but that's brilliant, and so this whole creative process is really discovering really what you don't know. And my father used to say many years ago, Dennis, whatever you come up, because I was just like, Dad, I created this new thing. And he's like, Dennis, whatever you come up with, it's already been thought of before. And I thought that was so cruel. I mean, how could you say that to me? Because I have this new idea, and it's my idea, and it's so creative. And I think what he is saying, it's not necessarily being thought of by somebody exactly in the rendition or whatever that you're seeing it as, but the basic ideas have been thought by many minds throughout many centuries. And so really, is what you're saying that creative, or is it really out there, and in most cases it's not, so, but of course, not to be negative, you still got to keep on trying. And maybe it's unique in this situation because you've seen it from a slightly different perspective, and that's what makes it magical.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, I'm sure that's the draw for artists, right? No pun intended with draw. But, musicians, writers, painters, dancers, all of that. There's the need to create. And many times it's the process. It's allowing my brain to work in that manner, rather than to give up and say, I'll just shuffle the cards that are already here, and these are the ones I can play with. It's like I have the need to express myself, and I don't care what it's been done before. It's the process in me that's generating this. If we look back, and I'm sure you have, as I, there's so many different patterns of archetypes that exist. Astrology, your signs, the archetypes that come from the Enneagram, the Jungian personality types, and many of them are pretty applicable. And you could say, well, everybody falls into one or two or three of these different archetypes. So, you're not anything new on this planet, kind of thing. But it still doesn't contain how we express ourselves within that archetype. And, I grew up with the phrase, there's nothing new under the sun, right? I'm sure we've all heard that one. But there is, actually, there's plenty of new under the sun. And that new is how things are combined and put together and the permutations. So, this aspect of, it's all been done before. Similar, but not the same. And that's okay.
And that's okay. Yeah. There are patterns like what's on my fingertip here that are similar on everybody, but my fingerprint is unique. And this fingerprint's different from this one, and so on, and different from those ones. And there's no two that are the same in the universe. So the leaves on that tree are all similar, but they are all unique. The snowflakes that fall, they're similar, but they're unique. So it's like for somebody who's looking at it and saying, they're all leaves. I mean, what's your problem? It's the same pattern on that tree, and that species of tree have that same pattern of leaves. So it's like it's been done before. So what's special about this leaf? This leaf is special.
And it is. And that's the mentality that, well, I think that's the mentality that helps us appreciate the world more. There's a big push towards that. I'm going to say philosophically these days, and a lot of the self-help and things like that are, you're unique, you're special. It's accept your diversity and honor your diversity. And at least in some of the veins of thought that I play in, there's a lot of that for support and counseling and coaching and things. But I was just reminded of maybe even just the past 30 years, but certainly even when I was growing up in the 60s and 50s. Actually, the 50s was a product of how do we make everything the same, right? Everybody gets crew cuts. Everybody lives in Levittown in Long Island, where all the houses are exactly the same. And, 2 cars in every garage and 2.2 kids and all that stuff. It was all that, let's just rubber stamp at the factory lines, blah, blah, blah. So that whole push towards sameness, which is what pushed the whole hippie and beatnik phases of the late 50s and into the 60s, was no, we're not the same. You're not going to impose that on me. So I think that acceptance and promotion of diversity is in some ways a backlash to the push towards uniformity. But it's also an acknowledgement of, this is how the world is. And even if you can find patterns and replication everywhere, if you look closely, it's not exactly the same. It's expressing itself differently. And we get to, go ahead.
Sarah, and we get to, okay. The amazing thing, you brought up art there. And I used to be like really into fine art at school, and I did exceptionally well in the whole field. I was like really good at spatial visualization and doing beautiful paintings. And I was really good at like taking what was there in front of me and painting it. And even like I started off with pictures, actually getting a picture and then transferring it into this bigger painting and, creating this painting. And my art teacher kept on saying to me, Dennis, you know, you've got all the skills, you can do all of these, use all of these different techniques, but I want more. I want you to express your emotions on paper. And and I was just like angry with him. It's like, this was brilliant, you know, and I've put in all these different elements and I've created this sort of amazing sort of expression of what is happening philosophically and whatever. And he's like, Dennis, you can do more. And I was going into my matric exam. I was like angry at him, you know, like, you know, I've done everything I can possibly do for you and you're just never happy, you know. And I sat down in the exam room and there was just this pot plant in front of me with, I don't know, this beautiful flower and whatever, but it was nothing exceptional. And in my sort of emotional anger and like, oh, you know, I don't know what to do for this guy anymore, I just started to doodle, you know, with this image in front of me. And I started to take different watercolors. I chose to do pencils and watercolors and whatever, as opposed to anything I'd ever done before. And I was doodling along and taking different colors and then just dropping water and letting water run and creating all of these sort of like whatever made me feel good at the moment, you know. And when I got out of the exam, he's like, wow, Dennis, like, that's what I'm getting at. You like expressing your emotions on paper. That's what it is. And to me, it was like, oh, okay, you know, whatever. But I watch, right. I watch Alex drawing, and yes, she can do all like perfect stuff, but she tends not to do that. She will like take a hard, dark line and then a soft and then an expression here and of just different colors and emotions and feelings. And oh my gosh, like afterwards, you know, because we have this color and our emotions are directly linked. And like after she's like created this creation of just like incredible expression and colors and light and everything, she'll like say to me, okay, well, what was this about? And I'll say, I'll just describe it from what I know about colors and about the sharpness and the spread outness and the flow and the whatever. And I explain to her what it is. And she's like, yeah, that's like pretty much it. But on this thing, this was what I was saying. And I'm like, oh God, I didn't get that. But it's like reading a dream journey. All right. Reading some or interpreting a dream. It's such this absolutely fantastic thing. And it's amazing, you know, when you talk to somebody and you say, what's your favorite color? And they tell you, say it's white or something, and you say, oh, okay, so you're more about a perfectionist and a Puritan, believe that you are sort of a puritanical type person, and it pretty much quite often is the case of how they perceive themselves. And then, of course, you know, from the chakras and all of that sort of thing, that the chakras tend to appeal to different, like your voice chakra is blue, you know, your heart chakra is green, and green is love, you know, green is the environment. It's like, it's fascinating how colors have been such an incredible, there's this spiritual relationship to it. And there's just one more thing I wanted to say there. It's just slipped my mind. I'll tell you when I think of it.
One more thing. One more
thing
back in Dennis's brain. We're talking about colors and connections. Let's see where else we went. The ability to create, we left off with Alex. So you're interpreting her thing, and we saw she had, it was kind of like you're able to discern what she was thinking. Good?
Yes, yes. And you know the fascinating thing about this book, we've been going through from infrared, which is like that stage where you you feel and you know intuitively that something's wrong, but you really don't know what it is. And you can see the hurricanes are getting worse, and we're having more earthquakes and tsunamis, and you sense there's something in this, there's something not right. And the government's doing all these crazy things, and you sense there's something there, but you don't really know what it is. So that was infrared. And then we moved from red to orange to yellow to blue to green to indigo to violet, going through this journey of discovery and self change and everything. And those are the colors from red to violet are the colors that, if you combine them, form white light. And white light is the sort of like when you see everything in the light, you can see it. All right. And that is like to me the point at which you're enlightened. Like you've like, oh my gosh, I've got it. I see it. I understand it. I have the wisdom, the knowledge, the skills. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can see the big picture. And that's enlightenment. And then the next color that comes up is ultraviolet. Now, ultraviolet, we've moved beyond the light spectrum, which was from red to violet. Now we're going to ultraviolet, which is beyond, it's still within the light spectrum, just like infrared was, but it's beyond and beyond the light spectrum. So now we're going to ultraviolet, and that is this place of the non-physical, the non-real world that we live in now, inverted commas. But it is that aspect of light which is such an important thing. That's consciousness, that's your dreams, that's all of this metaphysical stuff that we're going to go into beyond the physical world of white light, that's created by white light, into that which is beyond white light, which we don't actually see, but we know exists. So, yeah. So I just used that as a metaphor behind this book because it seemed to me to be that, So,
it's a good mapping. Again, that's what we do. You put together and created a new distinction based on some other existing concepts that you already had, right? And again, that's the creative process. So if by doing so, by combining the visible light spectrum with the philosophical or ontological thoughts that you have, you created a new way of expressing and for having people maybe be able to learn and understand the concept, right? So that's creativity, to my mind. That's something new under the sun. No pun on light intended. Now, we don't have, as far as we consciously know, a way to know what has been done in the universe up until this moment, right? Now, I understand there are other ways for us to access the totality of knowledge or thought or experience or time or anything that happens in it. But for the most part, as human beings and with the brains using the way we use them in the 3D world, we just don't know everything that's ever been created. So we can either just accept, well, I'm not even going to venture because somebody's done it somewhere and what's their use? Or we can say, maybe it is, but I'm having a hell of a time figuring out how to accomplish it, and I didn't even know it existed before. So I may not be able to market it because maybe somebody else already has a copyright on it, but that doesn't mean I can't spend my time figuring it out and creating it. And, if it bumps up against somebody else's creation, then so be it. To that, and I'm sure you've created a number of things in your life and you didn't act on it. And then shortly after you found out that somebody had already put it together, right? And this goes, I'm sure, with thoughts. On Facebook, I like to make comments, usually a little bit off of what the main topic is, staying in line, but just kind of taking a different cut at it, let's say. And oftentimes I find that there are 20 other really creative people that had that same take on it that I did. I thought I was being creative, but there's a lot of creativity out there. And part of it is maybe there's just so many possibilities, and maybe there's so little possibilities in the way we can riff on something, yeah, a lot of people are going to do it because we've all watched many of the same TV shows or heard the same comedians or read the same book. So yeah, we have a commonality that has us see this and say, oh, that's what it is, right? But that's okay, because at least 20 other people were being creative the same way I was. And, hey, I like that. Thank you. I needed validation for my warped sense of humor, or whatever.
Yeah, but still, although they'll come up with a similar possibility, they won't express it exactly the way you did it. And it is still unique in certain ways. So, the thing is like you say, is if you worry about what other people have done or said or whatever, you'll never get anything done. And then, of course, there is that Jungian sort of collective unconscious and whatever. That, the planet was turning before we woke up this morning, and there were other people there, and they were maybe stayed up later that night, and they then came up with the idea, and therefore their idea is like, it's like similar to ours, or maybe they heard ours and then wanted to put in their own words, or maybe they tapped into the collective unconscious and just, that's a brilliant idea. And maybe our spiritual guides or ancestors or whatever are like, okay, this is an important thing that everyone on the planet needs to know now or needs to think about. So let's introduce this idea. And they guide us into having a commonality of thought. And therefore that becomes so there are so many variables beyond our visual perception that are like, oh my gosh.
We know that trends, and certainly with technology, the memes and the thoughts that come out, sure, definitely, with the advent of the internet, ideas can get spread globally in seconds, literally, and adopted by lots of people instantaneously as well. But when we're made wrong for consciously putting together something that other people have done, that's when stuff gets really ugly. It's like, so you guys thought about the same joke. Good for you. So what had you think about it? And as we back out, we say, well, that's because you watched All in the Family, and then you watched this other show and this and that. And so what was kind of common experience had you put together this way? If you'd watched a couple of other shows, maybe you would have put it together a different way. But, because we do share many common experiences in life, even though we interpret it and receive them differently, there's still a lot of stuff that, as you know, subliminally gets into our head, and, we interpret it based on that conversation that's been instilled or we accepted or whatever, wherever it came from. So it's not that, I made the same joke that somebody 20 comments above made and I didn't read it, so we made the same joke. It's like, well, I just don't read 1,000 comments before I make my comment. I read what it is and I make my comment on it, and then maybe I'll go back and look. So that experience of replicating other people's creativity, again, I've seen it used reprimandingly in many cases. Don't comment if I put anything new. And said, who told you can write the rules about what I can do? As we both know. And the other thing is, wow, so many of us took it the same way. Cool. Because we look for groups, right? I look back in the 60s, it was who wore bell bottoms, who had their hair long, who had facial hair, who wore bandanas on their head, who wore bandanas on their belt. There were so many flags that showed this is how I'm thinking and I'm expressing or sending a signal. Then we do that as human beings. That's how we kind of create our Venn diagram tribes, that overlap, and we know who's who. Some people wear wedding rings, I'm a part of the married people. Some people wear crosses on their, Go ahead.
Yeah, I belong to that group. Yeah. The interesting thing is this concept of enlightenment. I think there's a thought that, where did that concept come from? And it could be purely like way back then, it was like you're in the darkness of ignorance, and here we move into a stage of enlightenment. And it's always been there as being this fundamental concept among humans. But of course, it was taken on by religions and so on as being, you've got to join our group to become enlightened, and then we will show you the way. And of course, they just took you back into ignorance instead of actually enlightening you. So, but the interesting thing there is like, okay, so the word enlightenment and the basically the expansion of it, which I created, was very, it was thought of before, maybe in different contexts from different perspectives and handled in many different ways. But, within our world, everything we see in our physical world is literally light that's being absorbed in, and certain frequencies of light that is radiating outwards. So, and in theory, if you go into that energy concept of everything's made of vibrations of space and energy and combined and forming whatever exists, it's like when you get to understand it, you then are literally seeing light, and light goes into and emits out of everything that exists. So because it's all at a fundamental level energy. So is it a unique thought, enlightenment, or is it just, somebody else thought of that before? Just the way I expressed it, the way I've used it to sort of as an analogy or a metaphor for what we're doing, that might be, so, yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking about at conception, there's a sperm and an egg, right?
Yeah.
And from that, this form comes out. Right? And so we're in that paradigm of fertilization, right? Us as human beings are, and most of the living things that we understand have some kind of connection to that paradigm. Yet who we become, even though we're all going through that same process and have that commonality of experience of being, replicating cell mass, and then into an embryo, and then into a living, beating, breathing animal. And how we experience that in some ways determines who we become as people. And of course, the type of parenting that we have, whether it was, I'm sure, whether cesarean or vaginal birth can affect things, whether it was, a tough labor or an easy labor, whether you got vaccinated within 30 seconds of popping out, or whether in the jungle it took you many years before somebody came and poked you. All of that stuff impacts how we develop. So yeah, we're all the same body, and there are many of us, there are doppelgangers around the world that look like us, somewhat, but it's a totally different experience. So as we create these paradigms and labels and concepts that seem we can fit everything in, at the same time, what we're doing is minimizing the diversity that we all have. And so that's certainly my take on the 20th century. Is that's certainly been a lot of what I experienced growing up, is how do we put boxes. Some of this is based off of I'm sure I mentioned them a number of times. I'm going to say Kierkegaard, but that's not who I'm thinking of. It'll come back to me in a second. The philosopher, Heidegger, when he's saying, that's man's predisposition is to codify and label and store data, and we do that with people too. It's just that process of, we have to compartmentalize everything, and when we can get away from that, life is much fuller. Our experience of it is very different. We can experience sunlight, every day and have a different appreciation for it. Oh, the sun's out again. Yeah, okay. Oh, I see. Leaves are on the trees again. Isn't that nice? I've seen that, done that. And we lose that ability to be present to what is here. So our presence then becomes, I know which box that's in. I know where I should put that. I know that type of person, seen that before. And again, we're not present to the experience anymore. We're present to the memory. And, many of us live out of memory and the interpretations we've made about the stuff that is on memory. So that whole beginner's mind, that being present, that just, your ability to, it doesn't mean forgetting everything you've already learned. It's just that you don't need to use it every second of awareness and awakeness, Just experience stuff first and then be aware how you want to interpret it. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's that's super interesting. I see Lorna's joining us. So the concept is, through industrialization and the concept of make it simple, stupid, and simplifying everything to make it possible for the simplest of laborers to produce the simplest of parts, and then to make it a general rule. It's like, this is how we do Western agriculture. We flatten all the land, we put in drainage ditches where there's too much water. We then put in these huge combine harvesters, and we only have one person driving it, and big plows, big harvesters, whatever. And unfortunately, ecosystems are, the greater the complexity of an ecosystem, the greater your chances of survival and thriving. So by oversimplification, we've been killing ourselves and literally wiping out the biodiversity on our planet. So it's like, it's critically important that we get that beginner's mind, as you say. It's critically important that we reconnect in like intimately in the now. Like, I picked up a spider just now, and like everyone had been like, oh, it's a big spider, it's scary. And it's like, bomb, that's the way they saw it. But I picked up the spider in the glass, and it was this quite big spider, but it had the sac underneath its belly. And I'm like, oh, it's a mommy spider. And the sac is starting to break open. So she's going to like release like thousands of little spiders. And it's like, spiders are predators for insects and whatever. So let's go and put her on our gardens where we have, where we're trying to grow these different species of plant, and they can put their webs in there, but all those little predators will keep the undesirable insects or whatever away from there. So just by taking that moment to slow down and look and see, like just the little furry face and the little, everything about it, she was beautiful. And seeing it from a different take on the world, then of course it just, all of the magic is revealed. It's like, we are missing so much by oversimplification and stupefaction and whatever, and indoctrination and our fears. And we really, like you're saying, we really need to sort of slow down and meditate and like fully experience life.
Well, yeah. It's probably in the 90s, there was a book about, I think it was labeled The Dash. Yeah. But it's like, that's what happens in between on your tombstone. The year you were born, the year you died is the dash, right? Yeah. And so many of us forget that, there is a dash in there. It's like, I just gotta like nose to the grindstone kind of thing, even for, like middle class, the supervisors and stuff, like managers. Yeah, got your nose to the grindstone to climb the ladder. Like, look at these are not even the worker bees that are, digging ditches and doing the menial stuff, picking cotton. These are even at the middle class, it's like, you're playing at a different level, but you're still playing that same game of embondagement. Yeah, I guess that's the word I can use. Yeah.
You're dashing from life to death, it's like, let's dash. And then it's over, and it's like, oh, what happened?
Yeah.
As
I
somebody
could
else
tell you
decided.
exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was saying before. Like I took on a lot of other people's decisions about who I was and how I was supposed to play, and as opposed to use my intellect and my time and my body and all that. And we tend to do that. There are definitely forces in the world that support that using people as things rather than people. They're a resource, which is going back to the Heidegger thing. Something I can use and discard at my whim rather than, wow, there's another living entity in this same environment that I'm in. I wonder how they're processing stuff. And rather than being in judgment, which then, of course, is a discernment that puts a label on it. And then okay, I know what that is. And again, it has no life anymore, no beingness. It's just a thing, a resource. Like the phrase human resources, even the first time I heard that, I just went, oh, that's a really ugly concept, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's such a big thing in America. You end up homeless. And what's the first thing they do? It's like they have these religious institutions. They're like, oh, we'll take you in, we'll look after you. And they get indoctrinated into the religion, which is all about reintroduction into the system.
Yeah.
It's like, so it's this forced indoctrination system. And there's so many homeless people I see that are like, oh, I believe in God and he's my savior and all of this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened to you? You gave up on the system and now you number one sucker back into the system. And it's a predatory system that always focuses on the weak, the infirm, the homeless, the drug addicts, the whatever. And to me, that's absolute abuse. When you can take advantage of people who are at their lowest,
Well, even the passive, they don't have to even be the drug addicts or anything else. It just be, I live a passive life. That's kind of how I enjoy my life, and they prey on those people as well. Well, if you're not going to make decisions for yourself, we're going to make them for you.
Yeah.
Just an absolute weird example of this. You might have read it. The state legislature in Georgia, I think it was yesterday. However many white men there were in this closed room, voted to not allow people to give water to people standing in voting lines.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. Like this is now a law. Now, regardless of whether the law stands up or not, and there are people contesting it from the minute it got publicized. They're putting that thought out there that we have this power, we have this control, and we're going to limit where people can vote, and we're going to make the lines incredibly long, and you are not allowed to give anybody in that line water. So they have to suffer and fall out, but tough, And of course, it's all about voter restriction and dominating, elections, however way they can. It's not democracy, but what they're throwing out there, this autocratic, dictatorial, like as if the law means anything to them. Because we've seen the past 4 years that the law really doesn't mean anything. How can we circumvent it? How can we disrupt it? How can we destroy it? And so how can we throw out the laws that were good for society and humanity? So not to get political on it.
That's an important distinction you made there. There are laws that need to be thrown out, but those aren't the laws they're focusing on. They're focusing on the laws like women's rights and voting rights and all those, because if they can take away that power, then they have power. So
well, even the environmental laws, those were some of the first things that the previous administration started to attack. Oh, we don't need these. We're good for business. So the heck with smog controls and pollution and water and all that. Who cares? As long as we're creating dollars for the few up top, we're good for business, right? That's what rah. And of course, it's not the case, but it's so. Yeah, those forces exist every day all around us. People carrying. Go ahead.
The sad thing is they have most of the power. It's like It really is that simple concept of the person who can go and just plunder and steal and pillage and acquire the most wealth will do so a lot more easily than the person who's actually growing those living systems around them.
Correct. Yeah.
So they will naturally be richer and more powerful and be able to control more and be able to do, but they're leading us to extinction. It's like, how do you make it a level playing field?
Well, in some ways, in order to stop them from getting away with that, we have to become them, right? We can't just be passive people living in the Garden of Eden. It's like, no, sorry, that guy's got a lawnmower and a bucket truck, and he's taking everything out of the Garden of Eden. This is not okay. So even though we want to live in that world, we realize, that's not stopping them, and they know it. They're the gaslighters, the manipulators, the autocrats, whatever it is. And there's so many people willing to jump on that bandwagon. Just look at the mercenary soldiers. I don't care who we got to kill. Just let me kill. Yeah, I'm willing to play soldier and carry killing machines. Like who would think that? How did they get processed to think that that's an okay way to live? So I don't have an answer for that, by the way. That was rhetorical, but we see that they are. And I agree with you. It's kind of a quirk in civilization and humanity that's where we become, where this is dominant. Survival of the fittest as a concept. Well, it's not the case, and Darwin's been debunked a couple of times. Is that no? While the two fittest guys are battling it for who's the strongest, one of the weaker guys is in copulating with the woman, and seeding her, right? And this has been, I saw a couple of years ago, many years ago, this whole thing. It's like, no, it's not that. It's the wily guy that can get in there and read the situation and go do his business and go, So I'm not saying that the champions don't get their shot, but it's not always a survival of the fittest. It could be what you and I think, many civilizations on Earth said, it's a survival of the kindest, or the survival of the most peaceful. And that's the concept we're looking to, or the survival of the most spiritual. There are monk communities where people, dress in orange robes and are that way literally from birth until death. And all they do is meditate and, contribute to the good of the civilization, I guess, or not civilization, but of the species. But to answer that, Dennis, I wish I knew why some people destroy and take and grab and, ask Elon Musk or what's his name from Bezos and any other uber rich. It's like nobody and nothing in the universe gave you permission to do that except us by being complicit with you're forcing it on us for whatever reason. You were smarter. You had a generation that was smarter than others at one point. You're stronger. You're the Amazonian people instead of the pygmies. So you won out in that battle a couple of centuries ago, and now you're running the world. So I don't have answers for it, but we know that there are these dynamics that happen, and whoever we are, we get to find our way in them, and then seek, if we're willing, to create the world that we want to live in, rather than submit to the world that we happen to be in.
Yeah, the interesting thing there is with the companies, quite often these big companies actually come from old money and parents funding them. I mean, we hear this like rags to riches story with Bill Gates, but his family was a wealthy family. They had
I didn't realize that. They were. Yep, and influence, absolutely.
And time,
yes,
time and money to be in a garage creating computers, like where the average kid was out there trying to mow lawns to make enough money to feed his family.
I'm a trust fund kid. I don't need to go to college. Yeah, exactly. I'm a trust fund kid. My family's got money. I don't need to work for a living. If this doesn't work out, then it's okay. Yeah.
Well, but it's interesting. I mean, Elon Musk, he was originally South African and on this side, but I don't think he came from a poor family. But what gave him his extreme riches was people investing in his idea as well. So there is that investor class, create a great idea and then get everyone to give you their money, and then create like the biggest sort of electric car corporation on the planet, and so
actually,
and
it's a good
battery
point.
manufacturing.
I haven't followed Musk fully, but of course I'm aware of him. But compare Musk to Trump, right? And not that Trump came from an uber rich family, but everything that Musk has done with that investor class, it gives the purchasers or the consumers some benefit, and it gives the investors some benefit, right? So it's worked out on both ends, right? Mm-hmm. Where the previous president and asshole in chief, almost everything he's done, it hasn't really brought the purchasers all that much value, except they're meant on, I live in the Trump building, great. But it's all smoke and mirrors, and many of his investors have not panned out at all. So it's the opposite, but still, they both were able to manipulate the masses in order to follow them on some level. And I no longer want Elon Musk to decide the fate of humanity than I do Trump. Just sorry. I'm glad you're a mover and a shaker, and you got some good ideas. And if we followed everything down, we would probably see that there are pluses and minuses to everything that you do. It's just interesting that the people with the minuses for the masses, like, if I get this, all of you will be worse off, but still support me. I still don't get how that happens, but maybe it's just they're good salesmen everywhere. They're selling.
I think it's selling the latest mooty, and lying to everyone through their teeth and promising them that something's going to happen, but it doesn't. But to me, it's more about, there's basically two super rich main groups out there, and of course the bankers are right at the top, and it doesn't matter to them who's in power. But then you get like the carbon fuel guys, and they like a very powerful group, and they encourage wars and all of that sort of thing. And then you get the more sort of nature, caring about nature group, but very wealthy, who care about surviving and making sure that it's to some degree, like, really they don't really care, but as long as it looks good for them. Then there's two of these groups that basically will invest in whoever's in power. Now, that's simplifying it, because it really comes down to individual sort of people in power who make those choices and decide who they're going to invest in. But Trump didn't get into power really because of the popular vote. He got into power because of the amount of money that had been put into getting him into power. And then, of course, after he was in power, of course, he didn't get the popular vote. After he was in power, then he was supported by these people to get, all of the against, like you were saying, against all of the natural protections, and all against the environmental, and against the Native American Indians, and against global warming. And so it was a very specific group of investors that provided the money. All he had to do is go and do his TV show, and he had a following anyway. And being rich and famous is a big sort of like asset in that thing. But more than anything else, if you don't have the money and the marketing and the whole thing behind you, you don't get there. And then, of course, he did all of the correct things, like supporting the religious right, and supporting the I don't know, Proud Boys and all of those groups,
NRA,
and the NRA. He like, there's basically, they came up with a plan, and it was like, okay, these are the guys we're going to support. These are the guys who've got the most money, and they are the guys who are going to get us into power. And bam, they did that. That's a formula. And he behaved so badly, and those people lost confidence in him. That's why he didn't win the second election. Otherwise, he would have won it. They would have put him in power again. But they had got what they wanted. Okay, we've got the rights to mine here and to frack there, and we've taken all of the spare land that we can at the moment. So we've got what we want now. So let somebody else handle it, and we're not going to put any more money into it. So I honestly believe.
Well,
that's
yeah,
the reason.
I wasn't sure. Yeah, I just missed the last sentence you said. You honestly believe that that's the root, I guess, of how he ascended to power.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I think that's the reason why you have quite distinctly two political parties. You got the rich ruling classes, and they've basically broken up into two groups. If that was like multiple groups, you would have multiple different parties. But really, the people who are the takers, who are in power, they are either for fossil fuel and whatever, and the burning of everything, and just plundering and wars and whatever. And then you have the other groups that are, to some extent, concerned about the environment, but are still willing to go to war to get what they want, like if it's gold and diamonds or whatever. So you basically have these two plundering groups who invest at different times, and they literally play the game. They give their buddies maybe a chance at it, and they say, okay, well, you got it for this next 4 years or 8 years, and then the next group is like, okay, you guys have a go at it. But basically, we keep it in our house. We don't ever allow it to go to the Green Party or to the, anarchists or whatever.
Yeah, I think they need to balance how much heat they can put on the population to get what they want. At some point, they know there's going to be revolt. And there are small factions that revolt amongst that. But in general, they pretty much know how to balance out the populations and the thoughts and all of that. They think way more long term than we do. And I'm not talking about Trump, though. I think Trump has been privy to other people explaining how the long process will work. That it's not us making those choices, even if we're in a democracy, whether we've won the popular vote or the electoral vote, or regardless of how many people back each other or how many senators vote for things. At some point in the long run, it's still not going to impact us all that much where we feel we're steering the boat. I'm steering the boat by rowing my oar a little bit differently than the others. We could get the whole side captain and the people that own the waterways, whatever image we want to work with, that, as you well know, are in the control of steering the course of history in many ways. Many of us don't want to believe that that's the case, and so we live our lives either in the quiet desperation or quiet removal, where we don't want to believe that that's the system. So I'm just going to make my little plot comfortable for me.
Denial.
Anyway, there's so many different ways to cut this, but yeah, exactly.
Apathy.
Hey, if I give a little money to the well, there's that too, right? There are many different ways to work it. But, if I put in a nod towards this is what I believe about my life and the world, that's good enough. If I put in my hour in church on Sunday and, fill up the donation envelope with something and put it in the tray, then I've done. If I send a couple of money to this cause or that cause or this GoFundMe or whatever, I've done my part. And, I speak because I played that for many years on and off myself. I still do. So wherever that was going, it was really just, how much of an impact can we make? And as ego-driven people, we want to think that we can make a difference and can make an impact. And as realists, some of us say, no, there's no way anything I do is going to affect anything. So whether we agree that a ripple can change the tides, don't know. But we still have to act in accordance and integrity with what we believe is the best way we can act. The problem is we've been domesticated and propagandized and hypnotized into believing certain things that we never tested. And we just kind of bought them hook, line, and sinker. And as we get older, we start to question them. And sometimes the business of life gets in the way of us truly taking a look at what's important.
Yeah, the thing is what we've done through this journey is we have literally opened our eyes to seeing things and knowing why and how. And so we're in a totally different place to people who unknowingly are feeling their way through it, So they can never really make the choices that we can, It's like,
yeah.
And the thing is we'll carry on creating this stuff, and nothing will happen. Then all of a sudden, maybe I'll pass on, it's time. We've done our time, and somebody discovers this and is like, oh my gosh, these guys were talking about this so many years ago. And this is what we need to do. And bam, it just takes off. So although I believe that this has been my life's purpose from even before I came to this planet, I have to just maintain my intent, maintain my purpose, and just do the best at what I can do, And I know that at some stage, somebody else will hear it. And there are people, it's like I'm getting a lot more likes from people in some weird countries in the East, than I am getting from here or from America. And it more than likely because they're like living that life and they're like, yes, this is where it should be, and they see it, whereas Westerners can't at the moment. But it's a journey, it's like we must never give up hope on that.
Well, certainly since the Second World War and the advent of mass media, even radio back 100 and change years ago, the ability for the government and propaganda to distract us from the things of life around us is just grown and grown and grown. And look, I worked for cable television for a number of years, and I did it because there were some great channels like Discovery and Bravo and ABC Arts and, these wonderful things, besides MTV and ESPN and Nickelodeon and all the other distraction things and the movie channels and stuff. And I thought, well, this is bringing value to people that normally couldn't get it. And of course, I was aware that it's their choice, and maybe they'll be distracted and not use it to their advantage. But how imposed upon by a lot of choices that still lead people to one thing. I just distracted you for so many hours in the day that you haven't had a chance to listen to yourself. And that's definitely America, the mass media, the magazines, the newspapers, blah, 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 whatever it is. So how can we distract you rather than how can we enhance your life? And, it goes certainly to the pyramid companies that just figured out how to monetize people's attention and their eyeballs. And that's what they called it for decades. How many eyeballs were on it? The Nielsen ratings, how many eyeballs were on that? And that's what they care about. It's not how many hearts have we touched, how many minds have we helped grow and create. Look, there's stuff like that out there, shows like Sesame Street and other things. And, reading is fundamental. And there's been a lot of good use of the media, but it's a small part of what gets out there. People go for the easy and the comfortable and the entertaining and the distractive. And maybe that's the secret of life, is those who can manipulate do, and those who can't are manipulated. And that's the cut right there.
Yeah. Wow.
I just threw that out, but it almost seems pertinent at this point. Either you run your brain, or you allow it to be run by others.
Or either you're a creator or a consumer.
There you go. Yeah. Perfect. Yep.
Yeah, it's like for me, when I'm doing this stuff, which is the greater portion of my effort, I'm sort of in the creation mode. But then you do reach a point where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't look at the screen anymore. I'm done. And then watching something else I don't know, is like a respite, sort of a reprieve from serious intensity and so on. So, and what it does is it, I think, also opens the door to watching other people's perspectives and seeing what's happening, and because you know you can't operate in a vacuum. You still have to venture out there into the other people's world to see what's happening to them, and why, and to understand. So, and often quite a lot of good ideas come from selective viewing. You know, it's like, if there's a movie on, existential movie on what we're doing to our world, and then sort of the life thereafter, and things like that, I tend to watch those because it's like, oh my gosh, this is where we're heading. And an interesting one is something like I don't know what it's called, but it's like, oh, Snowpiercer. It's like this movie about this train like rushing around the planet after everything's extinct on the outside because we froze our planet. And just those people living in their created civilization on this train, couple hundred cars long or whatever. And it's like this capsule of life, like racing around the planet to stay alive because they've got to keep moving, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, looking at things like that, it's like a microcosm of life, of political life, of, and something like that gives you like your fundamental sort of things of after the world is destroyed and so on. I don't know. I think that to me is interesting. It's like, if we do end up in those situations, how will we handle them? You know, it's
yeah. Well, in some ways, we are in a metaphorical state, not as grand as that one, but yeah, we're in that dash, right? In that
exactly.
The Snowpiercer dash,
on the train,
and and in our own, yeah, exactly. And that image certainly in a lot of the trainings I did, where if you're running on these tracks, there's no choice for you unless you build new tracks to be able to go in a different direction. So yeah, we are on this train that has its own momentum. And whether it's our church community, our school community, our neighborhood, whatever it is, depending on how we participate in the tribe or the little environment that we're in, it still has that fundamental, this is where it's going. And are you paying attention, or are you just the passenger?
Yeah. Fascinating.
I was going to say, this reset that we've been able to get the past year. For me, it wasn't such a big imposition because I spent time with myself and meditating and not influenced for many days. But the ability for people to just, they were forced to stop and say, here's your opportunity. Check in who you are and what you're doing and how the world is going. Unfortunately, a lot of it was just built on fear. The government's doing this and that, you can't work, you can't move, you can't kiss, you can't hug, you can't. But we'll see if how we come out of it now that there's an opening, let's say. At least in the US, it looks like there is. Many other countries in the world, like Brazil, are just in catastrophe and chaos because the dictators there, like in the States for a while, just decided not to do something with the ability to get people's attention and a quietness. And let's reconstruct a society that works. Instead, let's make it more dysfunctional so we have more control. Let's take people's life savings and their houses, and their jobs, and their education of their children, and their bank accounts, and people go, no, I want the old system, please.
Yeah.
I need my cell phone. I need my Rolex watch. I need my expensive sneakers. I need another yacht.
Yeah.
Well, they can get those. Yeah. Those haven't hurt too much. I don't know what time it is, Dennis. Yeah. I'm going to do a time check here, but I think we're getting close to.
Oh no, we're over quite a bit.
Yeah, I wasn't paying attention to time here, but yeah, it's 11:23.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I got a commitment at noon.
I was going to interrupt and say that we are over, but I didn't want to be rude. You were in the
Okay.
flow, you know.
No, that's fine. I was getting that, but I just felt the bloody time check. Yep. So again, another good conversation. I appreciate it, and as usual, it stirs the ashes and fans the flames, and has things processing again. So thanks for your time and your thoughts and your connection.
That's awesome. I really appreciate these conversations. You bring in so many different new perspectives and ways of seeing things, which is like fuel for my fire, you know. It's like
good.
Leads me off on some other train trip.
Back years ago, I just say back years ago, even in my youth, these conversations would kind of scare me because I wanted to be right. Now it's like, I don't care. I just want to communicate and see where it goes, where I had that intellect when I was younger. I just didn't have the confidence to participate. So I'm happy that I'm having this happen at this point in my life. So
it's really interesting. In certain ways, I've totally lost my confidence, but in others, I've sort of grown into this as well, so and it's fascinating how our energy levels changed. A conversation was like right in the beginning, it was like really high energy and so on, and then we went through a dip and then we came up again. It's fascinating just to watch these things again afterwards and be like, oh my gosh, everything's a lesson, so there's magic in every moment.
That kind of goes back to my being right stuff. It's like, I thought this was the way it was until I found out it wasn't, because I got off of being right and was like, oh, okay. The French called it the déformation professionnelle, which is you have blinders, right? So especially if you're being right, or if you have a deformation because of your profession, which could be your thought process, you're seeing this stuff very clearly, but what you don't see is there's all this stuff, like
exactly
what you don't know. Yeah,
exactly.
So good.
That's
glad
awesome
to delve
stuff.
that area with you.
All right, well,
Cool,
thanks
man.
very much.
Right.
Take it easy, go well. Hey.